This is the Beats Working Show. We're on a mission to redeem work, the word, the place, and the way. I'm your host, Mark Wright. Join us because getting paid to practice beats working to get paid. Walk us through when you start to teach people in companies how to become great public speakers. I'm guessing that there are a lot of hands that go up in the beginning. Like, what are some of the most common questions, Eric, that people ask you when you start these trainings?
The number one question is always, how can I get over my fear of public speaking? And ultimately, that's the right question, because the biggest difference between the world's best public speakers and everyone else, it's their relationship with that nervous feeling, with the fear, with the psychological constraints, the imposter syndrome, call it whatever you want. But the people who navigate those feelings the best, those are the people who are the best public speakers. So that's usually the most common question. And for good reason. That is the right question.
Too many nerves can short circuit. And I remember going back in television, you have to constantly look at your performance and then kind of look at it and then say, how can I get better? And I remember in the early days when I was super nervous, it was just really distracting. It was like, oh my God, this guy looks like he's about ready to cry or run away or something. And the other thing about nerves is that until your brain is not afraid, it's really hard to concentrate on the content that you're talking about. So what's your best advice when people say, how do I get over my fears? How do you walk people through that?
For sure. There's ultimately two ways through fear. And I think that is the case in any type of fear, not just the fear of public speaking, right? Fear exists in so many different areas of life. People are afraid of heights. People are afraid of this, that, whatever. And public speaking is just one context where fear is present. And there are two ways through fear, in our opinion, in our research. Number one is by understanding your fear a little bit better. And when you understand your fear more, you sort of defang the fear and you can start to outsmart it and run mental circles around it. That's one way to overcome fear. And the other way, and hopefully you're doing both, and of course we do both in our programs, is taking action. Ultimately, as an example, let's say you were afraid of heights or you were afraid of flying. I could teach you all about the causes of turbulence, and I could teach you about how safe airplanes are. I could do that all here on the ground. But eventually, if I want to truly get you over your fear, I need to take you on an airplane. Or I need to, maybe even better yet, maybe I should take you skydiving. Maybe I should do the most extreme version of the thing that you're afraid of. And ultimately, with public speaking, it's the same. I can do a lot of explanation and help you understand it here on the ground, so to speak. But eventually, you need to get on the stage. You need to public speak, push yourself, get feedback, get coaching, and have a breakthrough that hopefully leaves you a little bit less afraid and a little bit more confident moving forward.
I think we have an idea that people are judging us when we get on stage. And I remember taking a drum lesson from a group drum lesson masterclass from one of the top drummers, Todd Zuckerman, who's the drummer for Styx. And he had each of us play. And then afterward, he said, who was scared? And we all were like, hands all shoot up. We were frightened. He goes, where's that coming from? Because he said, do you really think anybody in this room was hoping that you would fail? And we're like, that's a good point. No, I guess not. He said, well, then where is that coming from? And somebody said, ego. And they were like, that makes sense too. And and what he did was he basically, like you said, defanged that idea. The fear that we perceive is often just created in our own brains, right? And when you really start to break down, everybody in your company isn't hoping you're going to fail. They want you to succeed. And so, defanging, that's such a great way to describe that.
Part of defanging the fear and part of understanding the fear a little bit better is, you're right. Most people are usually afraid of one of two things. They're either afraid of judgment or they're afraid of failure. Judgment being, they're going to think I'm an idiot if I forget what I'm going to say. They're going to be able to tell how afraid I am if I start sweating or if I get all red. What if what I say is wrong? They're going to hate me. They're going to think I'm stupid. They're not going to think I'm engaging enough, blah, blah, blah. That's all judgment. And the other thing that some people are afraid of is failure. What if I don't close this deal? What if, my team isn't motivated to take this action that I'm trying to teach them they need to take? But when it comes to the judgment category, that's absolutely something that people need to understand better. One of the exercises that we do in our program is when someone is afraid of judgment, we'll simply ask their audience when they're on stage, who here is rooting for this person right now? Who here is still going to be on this person's side, even if they do look like an idiot? And you probably wouldn't be surprised to hear the answer is the same in every group. Everyone raises their hand. And that's something that people get wrong. And part of the reason that they are so afraid is they think the audience is out to get them. They're going to try to stump me with a question. They're bored. They don't think I'm smart enough. They don't think I'm funny enough. And ultimately, your audience is much more likely to be rooting for you.
Let's talk about preparation and other variables that you can control. I'm guessing that you teach that one way to reduce stress and to reduce the anxiety is to really be prepared for the presentation, because I think it just makes sense that if we just kind of half-ass it and don't really prepare for the presentation, it can raise the stakes because it is more of a crapshoot, isn't it?
Yep, 100%. Prep is key.
I'd love to explore the connection, Eric, between storytelling and great public speaking, because I first really started to pay attention to this when Howard Behar, former president of Starbucks, whenever I heard Howard speak, and I invited him to speak to a number of Rotary events that we did. But long story short, whenever Howard would get up to the microphone, whenever he spoke, his format was basically to tell 3 or 4 stories that illuminated points that he wanted to make. And it was so effective. It wasn't, and I've heard so many corporate speakers just read from the annual report, and it's so boring. So like when he got up and spoke, he wanted to make the point that Starbucks cares about people. And he talked about in the early days of the AIDS epidemic, one of their store managers came to him and to Howard Schultz and said he had AIDS and said, "I'm not sure how much longer I have to live, but I know that it's not going to end well." And so Howard basically told this manager, "We've got your back. We'll pay all of your medical, and you can work as long as you can, as long as you feel that you can." And so he told these really heartfelt stories about how the company dealt with people and dealt with challenges. And it was really those human stories that he relied on to weave the narrative of his quote unquote speech. And I've never really seen anybody do that quite so effectively. But I'd love your expert opinion on the connection between story and great communication.
They're almost synonymous. If you're not a good storyteller, then you're probably not the best communicator that you can be. You're not reaching your potential if you're not using story. And the reason for that is humans think in story. Stories work. Stories cause people to feel. And maybe even most importantly, on that topic of engagement that we were talking about earlier, story is your ticket to engagement. And you can recognize that story is the ticket to engagement in 10 seconds or less. Okay, check this out. A few summers ago, I was hanging out at my uncle's house. Chances are right now, you and anyone listening to this, you're probably thinking, okay, and what happened at your uncle's house, right? What you're probably not thinking is, or what you're probably not experiencing is skepticism. Stories cause people to drop their skepticism and just to lean in and wonder where you're going next. No one hears that and thinks, "You're a liar. You don't even have an uncle, do you?" They're just wondering, okay, why are you telling me this? Where are you going? That is engagement. That's how you want your audience to be listening, wondering where you're going, leaning in along the way. And stories cause people to do that. Where people really struggle with story is connecting their stories to make strategic points. At the end of the day, as a public speaker, entertainment is part of the equation to being a good public speaker. But at the end of the day, you need to have lessons. You need to have morals to your story. There needs to be a point to your story. We love to say stories without points are pointless. And it's true. So story is key, but just as key as telling stories is being explicit and strategic about why you're telling this story. They need to come to a punchline or else you're kind of wasting people's time.
And if you think about it, how many hundreds of thousands of years have we all just been sitting around the fire at night listening to what happened in so-and-so's day? I love that. That's such great advice.